Okay, now I'm working through some of the select by attributes, or query by attributes, and I'm in ArcGIS Online right now. I've added the USA counties, and I'm going to do an attribute query by attribute for the state of Tennessee. And you could use the state FIPS if you knew the FIPS code, but I'm going to use the state name. Remember, you hit unique so that it will bring up a list of all of the possibilities. And I'm going to scroll down to Tennessee and apply filter and zoom to. And now we can see of all the counties in the U.S., just the Tennessee counties are selected. So that is using the filter. It's possible to make a copy of this. So now you can have two copies, but they point to the same layer on the Living Atlas. Remember, this data is coming from the Living Atlas. I'm going to rename this one to show that it's only the Tennessee counties. So now I have a layer in my map that is only the Tennessee counties. And I still have the original layer that has all of the counties. Right now it's filtered, so I'm going to turn the filter off and remove it. So you can see now they're both pointing to the exact same data on the Living Atlas. This is what we call a selection layer. In ArcGIS Online, you get to it by making a copy and having one filtered and one not filtered. So same data, one filtered, one not filtered. And you can also go about this query by attribute by doing the find existing locations. Basically going to do the same thing as the filter, but this time you're going to end up with a new layer, not just a selection layer, but an actual new layer that will end up in your content that will only have the counties of Tennessee. So once again, I'm going to look for state name, pick unique and choose Tennessee. And add, and I need to name my result layer name, because remember, this is going into that common bin at UT, so we have to give it a unique name. So I usually tag everything with my initials. So this will be Tennessee Counties JVL. This will be permanent now. It's another whole new layer that just has these 95 features for the counties of Tennessee. And of course, it takes a minute to run. I won't sit here for the entire time. I'm going to fast forward so that we end up with it done. So once again, you see you've got the 95 counties of Tennessee, but now it is a totally new layer in your content, not just pointing to the old layer in the Living Atlas. And now you can see we still have the original county data. And just to show you, you could do a filter using more than one attribute. In this case, I'm not actually going to do the whole one, but just so you can kind of see how it goes. I can look for Tennessee and, or that it's either Tennessee or, I'm going to do another value here. And that this is where it's the and or the or. In this case, they have to meet both requirements. And the other one is that it's an or. They can meet either requirement. So in this case, I'm going to say, or it can be Alabama. So in this case, I should get the counties highlighted or selected that are from Tennessee and from Alabama. So I'm going to get rid of that layer I just added. And you can see that this is in fact the case. So this is where you can concatenate this, the query by attributes. And now I'm doing another query by attribute where I'm looking for Tennessee. And this time I'm going to say and, because I want to see it matches both of the requirements. This time I'm going to see it's going to be just the very densely populated counties of Tennessee. So I'm looking at the population per square mile greater than 100 people per square mile. So if I apply that filter, and of course you can't see it right away because the other one's covering it up, but now this is that filtered layer that is looking for just the counties in Tennessee and also the counties that have more than 100 people per square mile. So just to show you that these query by attributes can be combined in different ways of ands and ors. And in this case, now I'm doing the same thing, but now I'm doing it with a analysis tool, so I end up with a whole new layer. So not just like this little fake layer pointing to the same data. This is an actual whole new feature layer in your content that has just the features that you've selected. So in this case, I'm going to find the ones that are at least 100 people per square mile. So now I'm looking, there has to be both. So it's the exact same thing I did with the filter, but in this case, it's going to be saving it in a permanent layer. That is a big difference between doing this analysis tool of find locations and just the filter tool, which does not create a new layer. It's just this temporary selection layer. But they work the same if you do an analysis. Okay, so now we are in the Pro version, and I'm running it off of my desktop rather than the Citrix server just because I know it's a lot more stable. So once again, showing you you've got all these options that you can change in the select ribbon menu up at the top. And you should notice that the Pro version looks a lot more like Microsoft Office and Excel with these ribbon menus. And so we're going to do the same thing, the select by attributes, and I'm going to go ahead and pick this counties generalized. And basically, once again, a structured query language, but I'm going to kind of fake it here and do it with the drop downs rather than trying to remember the syntax to do it with structured query language. And picking the state of Tennessee, so the very simple one right now. Now, once again, this is not making a permanent layer. This is just making a selection. And what's unusual about this, because you're not actually processing it at this point, you are not allowed to export it, which is kind of interesting because this is data that belongs in the Living Atlas. So we'd have to do a couple extra steps in order to be able to save this as a layer. Whereas in the online version, it was done pretty easily. In this case, we would actually have to run more of an analysis tool to be able to get results like we did in online. But once again, it's fine. I use selection layers all the time. Unless there's some need to save the data permanently, it's perfectly fine to just point to the same data but have that structured query language embedded in it so that when you click on that layer, it just shows whatever you had selected, not a whole new layer pointing to the same Living Atlas data. So now we're doing it again, once again showing you've got all those choices of whether you add to the current selection or remove from the current selection. We're picking the state of Tennessee again. And now I'm concatenating some clauses. You got the choice of the and the or. And this time I'm saying make sure that the population is high density, 100 people per square mile or more. And when I apply that, once I get rid of the other layer that's blocking us there and turn on the layer I just selected, you see you just pick those same counties that have the higher population densities. So once again, you would like to export these, but you're not allowed to at this point. We would actually have to run a tool that created the new layer from this selection rather than just this simple selection tool. But as I said, not a big problem for doing analyses and whatever. These selection layers work perfectly fine.